Chapter 10 is actually not too long. Now that we finally learned about all the parts that make us up and the way that we function, because remember that this also goes back to the foundational pasuk of Kikar v'lach adav mode. It's very near to you. Well, it doesn't seem like that. Day-to-day life, it doesn't seem karov elacha at all. They said, no, you gotta understand. You gotta understand what's going on inside you. You got these 2 souls. Okay, well, what do they look like? Well, they got 10 soul powers. They have 3 intellectual and 7 emotive soul powers. Ideally, in the godly soul, which is an actual piece of God, the intellect controls the emotions, controls, channels, create emotions. So everything is in good functioning order. In the animal soul, that's not necessarily the case. The animal soul, the emotions can be in control, the intellect may be in control. What day of the week is it? What hour is it? What minute is it? And all that is going to dictate now our behaviors. The point is to say, these are the materials that you're working with. This is your raw self. These are your raw materials. And you got to take your raw materials now and make them a better self. Make them your best self. Like I think we gave the example here, a person who has like a bad temper or something. Someone who has an angry temper, that's their raw self. You can say, oh, well, what do you want from me? I was born with an angry temper. Well, I want you to not lose your temper. I want you to not lash out in anger. I want you to not speak out in anger using the language that you do when you're angry. How do you do that? Well, you have to have the ability to be in control. You might not be able to ever undo the fact that you have a propensity toward bad temper, but you can do something about whether or not you allow it to manifest, or whether or not you allow it to express itself. And that goes with any of the negative things, temptations, desires that we've got. Now that we had the whole description of ourselves, the whole descriptors, and we learned what can be elevated, what can't be elevated, all that sort of stuff. Last chapter finally got to, chapter 9 finally got to. Now what happens when we put these 2 souls with 2 competing interests? They both want 2 different things. They have 2 different kind of urges, desires, natural inclinations, and they're now in the same body. One soul that's in the brain and the right side of the heart, and one soul that's in the left side of the heart. And they're like 2 kings that are waging war of the same city. They both want total control of the city, which are your thought, speech, and action. Why is it your thought, speech, and action? Well, thought, speech, and action are how the soul expresses itself. The soul has no other way of communicating with the physical world outside of thought, speech, and action. It needs a body. Those are the 3 main categories of what a body does in this world that are voluntary actions, I guess you could say, versus involuntary action. Once we go through now that this is what the goal is, 2 kings can't wear the same crown, so each soul wants total control of the body. Now the following chapters, this chapter, next chapter, and the chapters to come after that are going to say, okay, what happens when the godly soul wins, what happens when the animal soul wins, and what then is left for a Beinoni to be. Because we already said from the beginning, it's not a 50-50. It's not even a 49-51. It's not a 60-40. That's where we get to what's the Beinoni. This chapter deals with the Tzadik. We talk about tzaddikim, we mention them, but we don't spend a lot of time on tzaddikim as a general idea because this is not the path for everyone. We don't know necessarily who has the potential to be a tzaddik. A tzaddik has much to do with what you've achieved on the inside, which obviously, well, we'll get to that. But we still have to discuss it because A, we got to know what a tzaddik is, and B, we have to see at least what is the highest standard someone could possibly aspire to. It's not the expected standard, but it is the highest standard. So that's what we have here now. If you remember the 5 kinds of people that we got, that went all the way back to chapter 1. Tzadik v'tovla, tzadik v'rala, Beinoni, rasha v'tovla, rasha v'rala. So now we're talking about the tzadik v'tovla and the tzadik v'rala. Chapter starts off, it says, V'hinei kshada mag v'nafsha elokis. Then the nefesh elokis is going to wage war, and it's going to conquer the nefesh habahamis. We are now in the category of a tzadik. What does it mean that it's conquered? It's subjugated, the nefesh habahamis. It means that even though this person still has a nefesh habahamis, the nefesh habahamis doesn't really have a say. You've conquered a city and you are now the ruler of the city, but the inhabitants, they don't yet consider themselves part of your country. They still consider themselves natives of their country. They haven't exactly gone over to your way of life. That's kind of what the idea is. The nefesh habahamis is still there, but it's kind of irrelevant because the tzaddik is just not going to listen to it. Thought, speech, and action are totally in control of the nefesh melukis. If he totally is going to conquer it over, he could get the nefesh habahamis to be like a good soul. So he had it like almost like a second kind of nefesh elokis. That we're going to get to with Tzadik Gam and Tzadik V'tovlo. However, if it's not totally controlled and it's only been subjugated but has been brought over, you can get someone to go along with your plan and you can get someone to be excited and become part of your plan. Become like a leader of the group. Just getting someone to come along with it, that's the first level of Tzadik. The Tzadik She'ena Gamor, a Tzadik that's not fully complete, and a Tzadik V'ralo, it's considered Tzadik that there's evil unto him. What do you mean there's evil unto him? Not that he sins. He doesn't even have a desire for sin. It's just called a Tzadik V'ralo because the Nefesh HaBahamas has not been fully conquered. Because he's still there as a Nefesh HaBahamas. He hasn't turned it into Nefesh Elokis. We have here our steps of becoming a tzaddik. So everyone knows what our programs are for becoming. And some of this we'll discuss, it kind of leads into what comes next. Original idea is that he's removing all the sullied outer garments. They call the begadim atzonim. They're vile, vomitous, disgusting garments. As in, any desires of this world, the tzaddik has no desire for the physical world. When it sees food, it talks about the example here of Hillel Zaken, that I'm going to do a kindness for a poor person. After a full day of teaching, and a full day of being in the academy or wherever and with his students and all that sort of stuff, he said, oh, I have to go do a kindness for a poor person. And he was talking about his body. As in, I got to go feed the body. It was an entity totally like apart from him. The physical world was not... Okay, you're existing in the physical world, but there was no draw for him in the physical world. Just because this is the world that God put us in and we're going to elevate this world. But removing the outer garments, remember the garments are the thought, speech, and action. So the tzaddik is totally rid his thought, speech, and action, the machshava dibar ma'aseh, the garments are totally rid of any sort of desire or any sort of pleasure in the physical world. You know when sometimes you're watching little kids and you're like, I can't believe they're going crazy over that. You get a 5-year-old to do anything for a sticker, and probably maybe a 35-year-old, if they're being kind of like facetious, they'll do anything for a sticker. But as a general thing, you kind of laugh when kids will do anything for like a sticker or a lollipop. You're like, I can go to the store and buy a whole bag of lollipops. What are you guys all going crazy for? So a tzaddik will look at the physical world and it's like, what are you guys all going crazy for? What are you chasing after? It's so nothing. It's so irrelevant what you're going for. You're chasing after vanities and foolishness. Part of the path of becoming a tzaddik, or knowing if someone's a tzaddik, which we can't necessarily distinguish it, because we're not soul readers. We can't look into someone's soul and see where the nefesh Bahamas is. But as a general idea for someone who is a tzaddik, their garments, their thoughts, speech, and action, there is no pull, there's no draw for them in the physical world, and there's no temptation or desire in the physical world. It doesn't do it for them. They remove themselves from any sort of pull. And not because they've actually removed themselves from society. That's different than like a parch or someone who goes to be like a hermit somewhere. They live within the world, but the world does not appeal to them in the physical sense. The physical material pleasures do not appeal for them. That's why we have our second step here, that they're totally repelled and disgusted by the pleasures of this world. You're going to do that? Like, don't you see you're stepping in mud? What are you doing? He loves God just because. That's why he loves God, just because. There's no reason for it necessarily. There's no ulterior motive of, oh, I love God because he gave me this. I love God because he did that for me, this and that for me. He loves God because he loves God. That's simple. There's different levels within it, but that's how, as a general thing. Here comes the whole second part, which actually leads us into the Tzadik Gamar. What's a Tzadik Gamar? Or Tzadik V'tovlo? Tzadik there's good under him, or Tzadik Gamar, a complete Tzadik? A Tzadik Gamar has turned over the evil in him to good. So it's not just that he resists evil, and it's not just that evil has no appeal to him, not just that he doesn't listen to him, but he has actually turned the evil into good. That's why it's Tzadik V'tovlo. The bad has become good. Negative has become positive. To the extent that it's like he has two nefesh elokis. Because the nefesh Bahamas has been so won over, the nefesh Bahamas has so been brought over to the side, to his cause. The king has so completely conquered the city is, you're our king now and we're your people. Not just like, oh, this is the one who's in charge of us these days. It's like he has two nefesh elokis. Of course there's no desires for the physical world. Of course there's no temptation within the physical world. Everything is just absolutely godliness. And the nefesh Bahamas itself is like another nefesh elokis. This is a very important point that's made. And this is something actually, a lot of people have a little bit of a hard time with this one. Because the Alter Rebbe very much highlights, anything that's from Sitra Achra, that's Tzadik Gamar, a complete Tzadik, hates it. He can't stand it. He can't stand anything that's Sitra Achra because his love for God is so complete and it's so much. And it's such a great love that he has for him that he cannot tolerate anything else. So people have a hard time with that because, wow, how can you talk about a righteous person who has no tolerance? Tolerance should be tolerance for everybody. Well, it's like all these quotes, I think Dennis Prager, however many years ago, Berkeley, California, which we all know that gem of a city, was going to make itself into a hate-free city. There's going to be no hate within our city. And he's like, what do you mean there's going to be no hate? I hate rapists, I hate molesters, I hate murderers. There is such a thing as hate. Now, there's a difference between saying I hate you versus I hate the evil that's within you. Tzadik could definitely make that distinction. There are times where the Torah tells us, oh, a person has crossed a line. God forbid if someone does murder or kidnap, whatever would be a capital punishment crime. There are times that the Torah tells us that happens. Tzaddik doesn't become more of a tzaddik to get someone off the hook for something that Bezdin, whatever, has decided for Sanhedrin for capital punishment. But as a general idea, their love for God is so deep and it's so complete that they cannot stand anything that will block godliness. That's what Sitra Achar does. It's the other side. It blocks godliness from coming in. So a tzaddik also has an intolerance of evil. They have the story from, well, it's probably from the Gemara. They have Rebbe Meir, a bunch of hooligans moved into town, and they were driving everybody crazy. A bunch of bandits, whoever they were. They're troublemakers. Finally said to his wife, that's it. I'm going to pray to God to get rid of them. And his wife said, don't pray to God to get rid of them. Pray to God to get rid of the evil that's within them. As in, instead of praying to God that they should all die or something, that they should all be nullified, pray to God instead that the evil that is leading to this behavior should be nullified. Right. Well, what it takes away from them, which we'll get into with the next chapters, sometimes the pull in someone is so strong, they almost don't know how to break out of it anymore. So let's say someone who does constantly give in to anger, it's so hard for them. Theoretically, just because we're using the example of someone who gives into their temper easily, I could pray to God that it shouldn't be so hard for them to keep their temper. I'm not praying to God that the person should be changed, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes there are certain things that just seem so insurmountable to us, or because we've given in so many times, it's so hard for us to overcome it. So the prayer is not to destroy the person who's done this behavior. The prayer is to at least give them a break. This thing they can't overcome, whatever habit someone just can't break or something like that, please just remove the desire of whatever they keep falling into. That's what the prayer is. And that's kind of the distinction that's being made. Well, he is getting involved. That is, a tzaddik is interfering here. But there's a difference between praying for the destruction of a person versus praying for the destruction of the evil that is leading them toward negative behaviors. That's the point of that story. The thing here, though, is that if a tzaddik, if he has no intolerance, and he's not repelled by, and he's not disgusted by, or it actually uses the word hatred. If he doesn't have a hatred of sitra achra, of the evil that's blocking God, then he's also not going to actively try to shut it down. Because if not, you get into a very live and let live kind of world, which is fine as long as everyone's behaving. But if there's someone who's doing evil, when you think about any time through history when people have fought for something, for a cause that's bigger than they are, what gets someone to get out there? It's not just, because I believe so much in one thing. It's also because I cannot allow this other thing to proliferate. Which is sort of the mistake that we made. Well, we're not going to get to World War II, but it's kind of like the opposite of what we did during World War II. There was a genocide going on, and the State Department said, don't send us any more reports. We don't want to get involved in a war. So not until the war came to us did we get involved in the war. So you could say, it's not our problem. And technically it wasn't until it came to us. Or you could actually say, no, this is so terrible. What's going on here? We're actually going to get involved. And America was needed to win the war. Britain maybe would have held out, but we need America to help win the war. It's a very important distinction. And even to back it up, this isn't specifically noted in Tanya, but we have it. This is from the Talmud. It says, he who is kind to the cruel ultimately be cruel to the kind. Which actually, you have a real example of that. That's what's going on with all the crazy DAs in all the cities where they're letting people off the hook. You have a guy who just shot up a whole whatever, and they gave him an ankle bracelet and a $25,000 fine. That is not an intolerance of evil. An intolerance of evil means you are shut down for what you've done. Now, the question of what to do about what happens is a different question. But we're not just going to let you out while the evil is still rampant within you, and especially someone who's shooting people. So the tzaddik, if he's going to have an absolute, complete love of God, which is a complete tzaddik, a tzaddik that is good unto him, this level of tzaddik also has an absolute intolerance of evil. Just add that being a tzaddik, you get to probably separate evil from a person. Instead of just saying, you've sinned, you're an evil person, say, no, there's an evil within you that we have to be rid of. But he's not going to actively try to be rid of it if he can tolerate it. The tzaddik cannot. To be a complete tzaddik, there is no tolerance. The Alter Rebbe says it's kihem zel umazeh. Remember our phrase of zel umazeh, this opposite this? So the Alter Rebbe says that for a tzaddik's absolute complete love, the opposite of that, the counterbalance of that, is an absolute hatred of evil. So you can know how complete a tzaddik's love for God is, well, theoretically, by knowing his absolute intolerance of evil. Think about even just like a mama bear, mama animals. If you get in between them and their kid, they don't care who you are. You're a threat, and we will not tolerate any threats. Sitra achra, we already learned that anything that's clean on sitra achra actively blocks godliness. So if my love for God is so complete, how can I tolerate it? I cannot handle anything blocking godliness. My love doesn't allow for that. So that's kind of what it's saying here. Which is why also that we have the tzaddik she'ena gamor, a tzaddik that's not a complete tzaddik. His hatred of the sitra achra is not complete. That's why he's called a tzaddik viralo. The ralo, which is the nefesh habahamis, is not because he's evil, but the nefesh habahamis is still there and it's just been subjugated to him. So it's still considered ra, it's not tovlo. Do we see that distinction? And one, the nefesh habahamis became like a nefesh elokis. Tovlo means that his nefesh habahamis is now good for him. It's good unto him. A tzaddik she'ena gamor, a tzaddik viralo, the evil that's within him, well, we keep saying evil, but the negative side of him has been totally subjugated to him. So it's there, but it's to him. It's subjugated to him. However, because it hasn't been turned over, because his hatred is not complete, the ra is still there, even though it's subjugated to him. Therefore, his love of God is not an absolute love of God. He does love God, and he loves God on a level that's way different than the average person. And there's a lot of levels of this. How much nefesh habahamis is still left in him? How much has been turned over? How much is not? So there's a lot of gradations here in the level of tzaddikim. But as a general thing, he hasn't reached the level of tzaddik gamor. He hasn't reached the level of tzaddik v'tovlo, as long as his hatred of evil is not complete, as long as his love of God is not absolute. And as long as the nefesh habahamis is still like a nefesh habahamis, even if it is subjugated. That's his avoda. Just because someone reaches the level of tzaddik doesn't mean you're done. Dealing with infinity, you're never really done. Anyways, so now just going back also to tzaddik gamor, tzaddik v'tovlo, the Rashbi, you call them reis b'nei aliyah. You call them b'nei aliyah, that there are so few. The b'nei aliyah here is talking about a tzaddik gamor. That there are so few of them because the level of it is just such an incredibly high level to reach. One of the reasons why they're called B'nai Aliyah, because the evil within them, the Nefesh HaBahamas, the negative parts of them, have been elevated, raised up to be good. The second reason why I call B'nai Aliyah is because we have the pasuk of Ezehu Chassid Amas Chassidim Kono. Who is a Chassid? Someone who does kindness with Kono is creator. But here means Kono, they're going to use it as kan, like a nest. Who is a chassid is someone who's, in this thing, someone who tries, and his aim and his goal is to bring about the uniting of God. You have to have it in the Hebrew. Kutcha Brichu, Akadosh Baruch Hu, and Shechina. Two elements of God to bring them together in this lower world. Before you say Baruch Shamar, say L'Shem Yichud Kutcha Brichu, Shechinte. Theoretically, it's something that thought we're supposed to have before every mitzvah that we do. That we want to bring the higher aspects of God, and we want to unite it with the level of Shechina, which is the level that creates the world. And before you ask, the 50s gets into this aspect. What does it mean Kutcha Brichu, Akadosh Baruch Hu, and Shechina? What's the difference, and what does it mean uniting them? The Tzadik's whole goal, the Tzadik Gomer's whole goal is God himself. Unification within the physical world. Revealing God within the physical world. Every time you do a mitzvah, there's this essence of God that you want to unite. Kadosh Baruch Hu aspect that you want to unite with Shechina. Part of the bringing heaven down to earth thing. We get into it in the 50s because we're trying to do an abbreviated explanation here, and there's much more to say on it. Point is, he compares it to someone, a son, whose love for their parents is greater than life itself, and they would do anything for them. Even to the extent of becoming a captive in their place. Obviously working to redeem them and all that sort of stuff. The point is that we're talking about an incredibly high level of love for God. It's not just someone who's just totally dedicated themselves to God, it's a level of love that's a much higher level. A level of love that goes beyond any sort of spiritual pleasure, any sort of reward, or anything like that. That would be what a complete tzaddik has. The difference between the love of the tzaddik gomer and the love of the she'ena gomer, tzaddik she'ena gomer, his love is more like ha'ikal tameid l'chulamayim, the Navi, which says all those who are thirsty come and drink. A tzaddik she'ena gomer has a spiritual thirst, and they quench it. Nothing wrong with that. But like, I want so much God, I want so much God, I want so much God. Right? And so they want to go quench it. They want to quench your thirst. That's why they surround themselves totally with Torah mitzvos, right? We know that Torah is compared to water. We've done that. It's all back in chapter 4. We're going to quench the thirst with God. That's where the unification with God comes. And that's why it's also not totally complete. It's not a totally complete love of God. A tzaddik that is complete is a tzaddik as Ezu chassid amas chassid im kono. Who is a chassid is someone who does kindness with his creator. As in, it's not about me. It's not about me quenching my thirst. Not that a tzaddik thinks about themselves in that regard, but it's not about the thirst that I have. It's about bringing God down to this earth. It's about bringing about the unification of Kutcha Brichu and Shechina in the physical world. It's not even about whatever spiritual thirsts I might have. This doesn't totally go here, but it kind of does. They have the example of a chassid went to, I don't remember which Rebbe it was. One of the Rebbes. I said, I've got a problem. It's very hard for me to study Torah. So what am I supposed to do about studying Torah? He said, I got another issue. I love studying Torah. Right? How am I supposed to know? Maybe I'm studying Torah because I'm just indulging myself. And I'm just doing this because I love it. You have a hard time studying Torah. At least when you study Torah, you're doing this purely for God's sake. And you're not doing it for your sake. For me, every time I study Torah, maybe I'm just doing this because I love the intellectual pursuit. The point is, there's a difference between these two levels of tzaddik. And there's many gradations within these levels of tzaddik. A tzaddik is someone who, on the base level, is someone who has conquered the animal soul. To the extent that the animal soul has been totally subjugated, doesn't raise any fuss, he's got no say in it. The highest level of a tzaddik is someone who not only has conquered the animal soul, but has also turned it into, has elevated to good. As if, like it's another nefesh elokis, like another godly soul. Because it's not just following along with the program, but is actually involved in part of the program now. Going along with being a complete tzaddik also comes along with an absolute intolerance for evil. I don't want to exist anything that can actively block godliness from entering the world. Their love is so complete, zelu umazeh. The opposite side of it comes with an absolute intolerance for evil, which also, again, can lead to more active fighting against not allowing evil and terrible things to proliferate and exist. Everybody is made differently, and you need the scholars and you need the mitzvah doers. I'll just say this, and maybe it will have to answer the question, or maybe it will lead you to where you're trying to ask. There are scholars and there are mitzvah doers. Just because someone enjoys study doesn't mean, we have to pull you away from it now. They want to reach a higher level. They'd have to work on themselves to remind themselves that study is not just about my own pleasure. Study is all about the unification with God in the moment of study. It's all about know God in all your ways, and all the. Actually, learning about Hashem is an actual mitzvah, and it's also an end unto itself. Torah study is an end unto itself, as far as that goes. There's Torah study in order to do mitzvahs. There's Torah study because Torah study itself. So if a person is made, they can sit in a kollel all day. Doesn't mean they're not allowed to sit in a kollel all day. Learn a kollel all day. They also happen to enjoy it. Okay, fine. So at least I put them in the kollel all day. We're not going to take away from their learning all the time. But if they personally, look, I'm already doing everything right because I'm sitting in a kollel all day. So I don't have other temptation and desires. No one has to worry about what I'm going to be like in business. I'm not going to cheat the scales. I don't have scales to cheat. That's because you have your own path now of refinement. Targum mitzvahs are for everybody. As far as the actual halacha, unless you have to talk to your Rebbe, everything applies to everybody equally. Whether or not you're a tzaddik, everybody has the same mitzvahs. One thing that's very interesting, which is just it's kind of a side note, and this is something I emphasize a lot with my other classes, Tanya never uses the words of religious people and not religious people. He doesn't use that kind of phraseology. He talks about people who do mitzvahs and people who don't do mitzvahs, and people who have temptations and desires and people who don't have temptations and desires. Someone who might transgress or not transgress. Because at the end of the day, no matter who you are, we all have the same mitzvahs. A tzaddik doesn't have separate mitzvahs than us. Changing the world, you don't have to be a tzaddik to have done the mitzvah that's going to affect the world. The experience of the mitzvah is different because their appreciation for the mitzvah is different. We all have the same mitzvahs to do. When we look at what kind of individual levels each one of us are on, our experience of the mitzvah is going to differ. Our ease of access to the mitzvah is going to differ. And a lot of that, some of that is circumstance, some of that is how much we work on ourselves to make this an easier mitzvah that I feel is more accessible to me, or that I understand. Maybe I have to understand it more. Maybe I have to spend more time doing this mitzvah and then I'll appreciate it more, whatever it's going to be. So I don't know also that has to do with anything, but it's an important thing that after we said all this about a tzaddik, and there's so few of them, and not everybody could attain it, but at the end of the day, every single Jew has the same mitzvah, whether they're tzaddik or whether they're Rasha. No matter who a person is, we all have the same Torah mitzvahs. Tzaddikim don't get special mitzvahs that are not part of the Torah. They might have certain kind of missions to do in the world because of who they are. Again, what their experience of the mitzvah is going to be different. But just because someone's a tzaddik, they don't have 614 mitzvahs now. Or only this mitzvah can be done by tzaddikim. We don't have that. All the mitzvahs are the same for everybody. Side note, but that's a good thing to end off with chapter 10 after we said all that. Even though we can't all be at this level, we still know what our highest level of aspiring to. Same way we're going to learn about Moshe Rabbeinu, we're going to learn about great people. We could try, we want to aspire to it, we want to know what our highest level of reach is. We don't want to just necessarily set, even though Beinoni is a pretty high level. Like, oh, everyone could be a Beinoni. Are you sure? Yeah. But we want to see what it is, we want to identify what it is, and we want to know that we can do what we got to do, and we still got to go about our day, whether or not we've reached this level. That's chapter 10.